Our top story, US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's brief stop in Taiwan has raised tensions in East Asia, and China now says it's cancelling several defence meetings with the US, as well as calling off key climate talks with Washington. Meanwhile, Beijing has announced sanctions on Pelosi and her immediate family for, and I quote, seriously interfering in China's internal affairs and seriously undermining China's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the US House of Representatives, has said her visit was about paying respect to, quote, flourishing democracy on the island, which Beijing views as a breakaway province. In response to the trip, China has launched massive military drills all around Taiwan. It says the air and sea combat drills were for the purpose of, quote, continuously testing the joint combat capabilities of the Chinese armed forces. The Taiwanese Defense Ministry says several Chinese military planes and naval vessels have actually crossed into what had been an unofficial buffer zone between China and Taiwan for decades. Speaking to the press in Taipei, the Taiwanese premier called Beijing their evil neighbour.
China is an evil neighbor, showing its military power at the gate of our country, using military exercises to destroy the busiest lanes of international shipping. China's action has received condemnation from neighboring countries and the world. We call on China to take care of the people with a full heart, because that is the most important thing.
President Tsai Ing-wen also slammed the military drills that have been conducted around the island. Take a listen.
I would like to emphasize that we will not escalate conflicts or provoke disputes, but we will firmly defend our sovereignty and national security and stick to the line of defense of democracy and freedom.
Meanwhile, tensions in the Taiwan Strait have become the top focus of the ongoing ASEAN meeting in Cambodia, with US Secretary of State Antony Blinken calling the drills a significant escalation.
These provocative actions are a significant escalation. We've seen how Beijing has attempted to change the status quo on Taiwan for some time. For example, more than doubling the number of aircraft flown over the center line that separates China and Taiwan over the past 2 years, pursuing economic coercion, political interference, and cyber attacks against Taiwan. Now, they've taken dangerous acts to a new level. The United States has conveyed to the PRC consistently and repeatedly that we do not seek and will not provoke a crisis. President Tsai has said the same thing. China has chosen to overreact and use Speaker Pelosi's visit as a pretext to increase provocative military activity in and around the Taiwan Strait.
Now, just to bring you some more context on this story, Taiwan is a self-governed island that China considers to be its own. The US has for decades supported the so-called One China policy, but Washington also says it's against any unilateral change in the status quo, especially by force. During her visit to Taiwan, Pelosi said she supports the island and its people, but now in Japan, Pelosi says her visit did not represent a shift in US policy.
They may try to keep Taiwan from visiting or participating in other places, but they will not isolate Taiwan by preventing us to travel there. We've had high-level visits, senators in the spring, a bipartisan way, continuing visits, and we will not allow them to isolate Taiwan. They are not doing our travel schedule. The Chinese government is not doing that. Our friendship with Taiwan is a strong one. It is bipartisan in the House and the Senate, overwhelming support for peace and the status quo in Taiwan.
And for more on this story, our correspondent Patrick Fox sent us this report from Beijing.
Well, after Thursday's unprecedented military actions, which were described by Chinese state media as a war plan rehearsal, there was always a bit of a question as to how much further Beijing would push the envelope, and that was really a big concern. It does seem today as though the countermeasures have taken more of a diplomatic turn. China has now announced it is sanctioning Nancy Pelosi and her family. That is a symbolic move largely, but no doubt it was prompted partly by some of the comments she made while in Tokyo, where she hit out at China over its human rights record in particular. That aside, China has also announced that it will cancel dialogues between US and China military leaders. It's also suspending climate talks between the two countries, suspending US-China cooperation on cross-border crime prevention, and also suspending US-China maritime safety mechanism talks. So it does seem as though relations between the two sides are really hitting a new low over this, despite the US insisting that it does not want to escalate this crisis.